Hello, Stormwater designers. Welcome back to Clear Creek Solutions hydrology education videos. Today, we're going to be going over what groundwater is, some of its uses, and just giving a general overview in the context of hydrology, how groundwater can be useful, how it's created. And so we're just going to dive right in. Groundwater withdrawal in the United States is in the tens of billions of gallons of water daily. So there's a lot of groundwater withdrawal that is occurring on a daily basis, and this is close to 1/5 of the total water use in the entire country. Groundwater is a vital source of water supply, especially in areas where dry summers or extended droughts cause stream flow to stop. Right, so if you have an area that might get some storms in the spring or winter time, but not a lot in the summer, very dry, those groundwater deposits, it's going to be very useful for keeping the water supply going in those areas. Elsewhere, water from surface streams is the main source of recharge for the groundwater. So recharge, when referring to groundwater, is when it depletes. Recharging is getting additional water to that groundwater so it can finally fill back up, and the water table can return to its typical value. So the occurrence of groundwater: immediately below the surface, the soil pores contain both water and air in varying amounts, and after rain, infiltrated water may move downward through this zone of aeration. Some water is dispersed through the soil and held by capillary forces, and if the retention capacity of the soil layer is satisfied, water moves downward into the regions, and the water in the zone of saturation is known as groundwater. And so we can see here on this diagram here that we have some precipitation, a little bit of evaporation. We've gone over the water cycle before on this channel in our hydrology education videos. Then we get some infiltration through the water table, and then there's a groundwater flow direction typically. And then in that layer of saturation, this is also showing a pumping well here, but it can also be supplied by a stream. And then in that layer of saturation is what is referred to as the groundwater. And so what is the water table? The water table is the boundary between the vadose zone and the zone of saturation, and that's termed as the water table. Its location is determined by the elevation to which water rises in unpumped wells just penetrating the top of the zone of saturation. The water table is constantly adjusting itself to reach equilibrium. So depending on how much water is being withdrawn, added to the system, that equilibrium is going to continue to change. So it's not really a static position per se. If there were no recharge to or outflow from the groundwater in a basin, the water table would eventually become horizontal, right? But that's not really realistic. But if that were the case, then the water table would just remain static, right? It's just like if you filled a bucket up with water indoors, that water table is going to be the same because there's no inflow and no outflow. But that's not really what occurs in natural environments. When water occurs in cracks, fissures, and caverns, the situation is somewhat different. Flow in large openings is usually turbulent, and adjustments take place rapidly. Immediately above the water table, there's often a capillary fringe or tension-saturated zone. In this region, the pore space is completely filled with water, but capillary and molecular forces are significant, so that the pressure in the water is less than the atmosphere. And then for the sources of groundwater, the main source of groundwater is precipitation, which may penetrate the soil directly to the groundwater or may enter surface streams and percolate from these channels to the groundwater. Groundwater typically has the lowest priority on the water from precipitation. Interception, depression, storage, and soil moisture must be satisfied before any large amount of water can percolate to the groundwater. So all these different facets, the depression, storage, the soil moisture, that's going to absorb all the water first. And groundwater is going to get a lot of the leftover water that comes after that. This low priority is an important factor in limiting the rates at which groundwater may be utilized. So if we're constantly withdrawing lots of water from the groundwater deposits, knowing that a lot of the surface runoff's not maybe going to get to the groundwater, then that determines how much of our use we should actually take into account, and maybe we should be more conservative with it. Geologic conditions determine the path by which water from precipitation reaches the zone of saturation. If the water table is near the surface, there may be considerable percolation through the soil. Relatively impermeable layers above the water table may prevent such direct percolation, and the rate of percolation from such an effluent is limited by the extent and character of the underlying material. And so this is a graph here showing the date, the hydraulic head, and then the rainfall of a certain groundwater water table here. So you can see as we get more rainfall, the hydraulic head is going to improve. You can see there wasn't a lot at this point, hydraulic head decreasing. And as we get some of the more of the rainfall here, the hydraulic head is going to increase and then go back down as we get less rainfall, less water flowing in streams, less of it infiltrating, percolating into that groundwater layer. Now we're going to talk about aquifers briefly. Geologic formations that contain and transmit groundwater are known as aquifers, and aquifers are generally classified as either confined or unconfined. A confined or artesian aquifer is bounded above and below by relatively impermeable strata is that the water pressure in the aquifer may be maintained above atmospheric pressure. In contrast, an unconfined aquifer is bounded above solely by the water table and overlying vadose zone. The amount of groundwater that can be obtained in any area depends on the character of the underlying aquifer and the extent of and frequency of recharge. The capacity of a formation to contain water is measured by the porosity or ratio of the pore volume to the total volume of the formation. Pores vary in size from submicroscopic openings in clay and shales to large caverns and tunnels in limestone and lava. So you can see we got aquifer and wells here. You can see the unconfined aquifer, the water table, and some of the layers that occur in this confined aquifer setup. And so it's just another variation on the groundwater there. So we have a free guide called the Hydrology Terms Guide. It's 3 to 4 pages of commonly used hydrology terms. If you want to learn, study up on that, you can download that guide in the description box. It's 100% free. Just tell us where to send it. If you have any questions about this topic, leave it in a comment down below. But anyways, we will see you guys next time.